line, protect and prevent. Stephen and David, a warm welcome to you.
Hi, Pascal. Again, thank you for having us today as well. And again, hello, everyone. Just thanks for tuning in.
Now, what is interesting is, and for our audience will be, I think, reasonably interesting to know that we spoke to each other actually a while back, and it was part of our, what we call the last Friday. So the last Friday of every month, we have a expert Q&A, bit of a news roundup, and we learn from this kind of your account, what's happening in your specialist area, and then we take on board action points and so on. But we discussed and we met and agreed today's agenda before the pandemic.
Yes.
Is that right? Do you remember?
Yes. Things have changed slightly, I think, since then. So things remain the same, but yeah, definitely.
So I'm very pleased to say that Stephen and David have done some extra work for all of us today to add some additional information about, not only do we need to learn how to protect our businesses and data in terms of online threats in general, but then there's an additional layer when it comes to COVID-19 and the current pandemic. Now, what is interesting for me is, I mentioned a moment ago that I'm leading on the skills and digital side of what's happening with our businesses. And you understand, David and Stephen, that the interest tends to be around sounds like marketing, operations, and so on. But the subject of online security and what we need to do as business managers is something that I'm going to argue is newer, and it's making its kind of inroads. But as I was preparing for this session, I came across some rather interesting news articles. I'm going to share them with you now, and I'm going to get your reaction, and then we're going to start with our structured interview, if you will. So if I just go straight into, for example, this article here, which you can probably see on screen, cybersecurity apprenticeship helps UK companies fill the skills gap. So I'm going to ask you in a moment what you think about it. A month ago, I came across this article. NordVPN report 165% surge in users as remote working increases globally. But actually, if you scroll down and you move to the subheadline, may present its own security problems. I like the way they say may. You may have a thought about that. And then perhaps more recently from Info Security Magazine, cyber attacks up 37% over the past month as COVID-19 bites. So starting with you, David, based on those three articles that were sent to me by the bots out there and AI because of my research, what's your initial reaction to those three headlines?
The bots are very good. The AI is very good, and I suppose kind of how we've seen things kind of change. Can we look kind of pre kind of COVID and things how things have adapted then? I think certainly what we find is in terms of the skills aspect. I think that the agenda with regards to cyber skills has been pushed heavily. I think obviously from an industry point of view. I think as we have a kind of a changing age in the workforce itself. Again, we can see some kind of appetite towards that. I would also again say that in terms of kind of the discussions around kind of cybersecurity, information security, data security, there's very much kind of a human and a social element of this, but also likewise, there's both kind of the social and the technical components to look at. So one of the things we're keen to kind of do with regard to this session, in terms of kind of any communications, is to try to move away from any jargon, to move away from any glossary, and look at it in practical terms. One of the kind of the implications that we have around that is that we could start kind of again kind of layering kind of terms. We could get lots of technologies, but we've obviously found certainly kind of in our experience that it's both, again, as I said earlier, there's a human aspect of this, and there's also kind of the technical components to it. So that the skills element allows for communication to happen. So you engage obviously with individuals, so everyone become kind of aware of the situation everyone's in. But also likewise, I think there are some remediations that can happen from a technical point of view, which are great. And in some cases, there may be some fixation towards that. But in reality, as we kind of explore there, it's a mixture between both the person and the kind of the technological device that's in front of them. And the challenge is to match it to. Sorry.
We'll ask you a lot about this today, no doubt. Stephen, your reaction again to those headlines?
It's very interesting to see that the apprenticeship route is being pushed for this. It's a great thing. Security kind of does fall in the background quite a bit, and it always seems to be an afterthought. It's one of those that always gets the budget allocated last. It's not really seen as a money-making element to the business, it's always seen as a cost center. And with that, you kind of always get that it does come last, even when it's got financial implications to the business. Just looking at the reports last year, SMEs were getting hit anywhere between £10,000 and £25,000 when they did have a breach. And they were saying they were detecting at least one breach every month. So these could be minor ones that don't really get reported up to the ICO, all the way up to full breaches where they have lost a lot of data. In terms of the VPN one, it's also a very interesting one, especially with the mention of NordVPN and other VPN services that advertise themselves as secure. More so when you don't actually know where their infrastructure is, what's been logged, where your data goes to once you've visited Facebook or your work system. Once it's out there in the ether as well, it's very hard to keep a contained lid on it. It's out there, it's released.
Yeah, we'll explore that together. So listen, what I have in mind for this morning is to actually invite you to take part in a conversation split into 3 key areas, or key segments, if you will, to use a podcast and radio term. So segment number 1, I want us to essentially, invite you to let us know about current threats as you understand them, and also perhaps what is unique with regard to the current crisis, and then what are the simple adjustments to our behaviors to begin with, and the sensible investment technology that can help us protect and prevent. Then we're going to move on to segment 2, and the segment 2 is more actually looking into what becomes, in your view, the new habits of a business owner manager when it comes to being in tune with regulations, being in tune with changes in criminal activities and so on. If, as sense, you want us to embrace your specialism as part of the package of digital skills that we have as individuals, then segment 2 want to explore the new normal, if I may use that term. And then the third one, perhaps I may ask you your thoughts and consideration about where we're going with this. What is the near future when it comes to cybersecurity? And then we wrap up with maybe some recommendations. So moving on to segment 1, which are current threats, both before pandemic and then during pandemic, and then what to do about it. I'd like to know more about it, but to kind of give us a sense of what we're talking about, can you take us through some of the labels and some of the names that we hear a lot around online threats? I'm thinking things like hacking and phishing and malware and all those things. It's all a bit of a blur, perhaps sometimes. Are you happy to pick some of the, forgive me, most infamous terms and give us a lowdown of what they are? Then we can move on to the threats.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the starting elements could be, I think if we place the kind of the internet as the Wild West, that's kind of how it can exist now. In some cases it's an explored frontier, but in some cases it's very much kind of an unknown frontier. And we've got, again, variations to kind of where people exist somewhere. There's very much a gold rush happening as well in certain kind of quarters. So you get that kind of feel that there's lots of things happening at the same time. So there's this kind of movement towards things obviously which are threats to information, that sort of thing as well. I think in terms of the jargon components, or in terms of kind of some key phrases, you probably hear the kind of the word malware. And malware itself, obviously, it's a shorthand, it's a portmanteau, if you like, for malicious software. And within that, there are lots of categories within that. So we traditionally see things like viruses, for example, again, would fall within malware. But anything that has a malicious impact or a malicious intent on systems, and again, we're looking at the technical aspect here, anything with regards to anything from a business point of view. So we're looking at the organization, but then likewise, there are elements which could actually have some impact on the individual. So again, we're probably kind of aware of the media implications of certain things where information has been leaked, and that itself has a risk to the organization, has a risk to the system, but also likewise, the end individual upstream or downstream of that. And I think, again, in the current climate, but also likewise in the previous climate as well, I think, again, the privacy of an individual is very much kind of core to the argument in terms of what we have. So we have, again, those 3 levels of the system, the organization, of course, the subject, if you like, the individual who could be at risk of this. So malware, as I say, anything which kind of causes harm to systems. As I say, we could link into that things like, again, very much buzzwords or kind of phrases before that, things like Trojans, who, again, they enter into your organization and they cause some significant harm. Worms, again, very much the same. We heard of WannaCry and its impact on the NHS. Obviously not so long ago. So again, that was very much a kind of a worm-based technology. Other terms you may kind of be familiar with is phishing.
Sorry. Go, carry on. So can I ask Stephen, the one that I've heard actually only yesterday on BBC Radio 2, phishing. What is that?
There's kind of two strands of it. There is typical phishing, which is your bulk mailed out sort of fake emails. They may well come from someone you trust, but it will essentially pretend to be something that you are expecting or would generally trust, such as an invoice. He has a pro forma for payment, or he has a file I want to share with you regarding a previous conversation. And this is kind of where they're getting quite cheeky. On a bulk level now, everyone you've seen is getting caught. They're entering a password somewhere and they get access to someone's mailbox. They're then hitting the previous contacts and saying, let's pick the last 1,000 emails out of their inbox, reply to a conversation and add our malicious file to it. And it can be one of several things they're aiming for. It can be that they're attaching a Trojan horse to get into the organization, or a virus or some malware. And once you're kind of replying to that thread, you've got the implied trust of the person on the other side. So if John Smith is emailing you back with a previous conversation where you've got all the thread from top to bottom and it looks real, it appears to be real, it is coming from their email service, you have a real level of trust behind that. You trust that there is a person that you've emailed with, that you've worked with, and that they are secure. And that's how they're kind of breaking down the doors. You do also get the more kind of mass email shot ones, this is coming from, a .cn address for China, and, it's gibberish, or it's got funny characters, and they're dead easy to spot. But we're seeing less and less of those and more towards this bulk use of credentials they've got with legitimate firms. You can't trust the traditional defenses, the traditional technical sort of solutions you put in place, because to those solutions, it is in reality, John's Auto Parts or whichever organization in the background. And unfortunately, they've had a breach and they're being used to breach down the line. And eventually the end goal is they want some money, or they want some sort of information from these organizations. And that's how they're reaching in. This level of trust. Beyond that, there is then spearfishing, which is a highly targeted attack, such as, let's say you're a multi-million-pound organization. This is typically where your CEOs or your high flyers in the organization get attacked. These high flyers obviously have lots of power. People tend not to question when they send an email saying transfer money to this account for this charitable project, or this, this project for the business that's high priority. Everyone knows about it. It's come with this person's name, even though it's not necessarily them. And both of these attacks have a very high level of working on the person, working on the individual, and a lot of it's behind things like fear. I've got an email from my CEO. I'm time bound. It's really urgent. They're asking for money or whatever. They can't reach the phone. They're stuck in meetings, and they're always playing on these human elements of I need to help them. I need to help this person get what they need. I trust them, and people kind of put the defenses down that they have built up over the years.
Okay.
Sorry, Pascal. I think just one. I kind of mentioned before about kind of the notion of the Wild West. I think kind of obviously Stephen was going to mention there about the kind of the door knocking. And I think in many ways, I think kind of one of the things we kind of have to be vigilant of, and I think again, kind of some things we're kind of keen to stress, is of course that this is it's a criminal activity. It's kind of no different to kind of again kind of door knocking, in terms of again scamming, which may happen on a door knock. Again, emails being the kind of one of the main entry points to an organization, and in some cases a lot easier than going to knock on a door. In terms of verification, in terms of there's no kind of physical entry at the door. It's very much the same type of activity. It's just we internally kind of use an analogy around how would you kind of secure your house differently kind of how you secure your computer systems. It's the same sort of kind of process. You wouldn't leave the keys in the front door, for example. You wouldn't necessarily kind of always kind of open the door to everyone. Would you always leave your front door open? So these kind of analogies play very much to the kind of information security, cyber security premise, where you're trying to lock down and be secure in your own house and home. And again, if you apply that to your kind of your technical solutions and your organization and your infrastructure there's a lot of similarity that exists between the two. So as I say, kind of Stephen mentioned before about, again, how people get in their targeted attacks, that sort of thing. The criminal activity isn't really any different other than the mechanism and actually how they approach. We have this, and I imagine it's in terms of kind of the second point you mentioned before about kind of the second segment, but some of the kind of the future aspects, of course, is that criminals never, obviously they constantly reconfigure. As laws becomes more stringent, as tools and techniques become kind of more kind of debilitating for their activities, they reconfigure and try something else. So we've got this kind of implication now about saying, okay, well, how do we kind of keep ourselves up to date with this? So it gets back to your discussion point before about the skills aspect. This is kind of certainly one way, but I know that kind of certainly, and I'm just cut off piece that, so I'm sorry, but in terms of kind of
my job to bring it back, I'll bring it back. Don't worry.
But I think certainly kind of with regards to kind of our ethos and how we kind of want to deliver, our objective would be is that in 10, 15 years time, you never hear from us. You've kind of owned this process yourself. Where the analogy of the Wild West comes in is again, in terms of how that existed, we had to have kind of external law enforcers. But again, at some point, again, hopefully, again, best practice takes over. Organizations themselves say, okay, this is the best way to approach this. Recognize there is this kind of ongoing threat, but they've done everything within their power and strengths and knowledge to say, we've moved away from this threat, and we're now better for it as an organization.
Okay, so let's go back then. You're absolutely right. If we are better informed as business owner managers, we can make better decisions, and we can also seek out, support where needed. So, can you, and maybe I'll start with you, David, and then you can pick up Stephen as well. What are the normal current threats? So we'll put COVID-19 to one side because there's something newer about it. But when we spoke to each other, many weeks ago, what are the regular threats that we need to be aware of? And then can we move on to what is new for the last 2 months, give or take? So starting with you, David, what are the normal ones, the current ones that we need to be aware of?
I think potentially to generalize an issue in the first instance. So again, forgive me on this one, but I think the biggest threat I think we kind of understand is that it's not a case of if but when. So it very much kind of focus there. Again, that could be someone just losing a single document. That could be someone deleting the wrong record. That could be someone, again, infiltrating someone's systems via different means. And some of the things we mentioned before about how they do that. So the use of malware, the use of phishing, incorrect passwords. Again, not strong enough passwords, reuse passwords, that sort of thing, which again, from a technical point of view, I'm sure Steve will jump on at his time. But I think, as I say, kind of, if we use the analogy there, that, as I say, it's not a case of if but when, then have a look at it from a different perspective that says, right, okay, everyone. And again, we mean in terms of the hundreds of organizations we've engaged with actively, that we've seen in terms of kind of best practice applications with regards to kind of links that we have in the US. Again, everyone has a low-hanging fruit. And again, very opportunistically, again, if we use the analogy of people in their homes and how people secure homes, we have different attitudes to how we secure our homes, what insurance products we use, that sort of thing. And again, the same applies to from a cybersecurity point of view. It's the same element, but just in a digital perspective. So everyone has these low-hanging fruits. Our rule, whether or not we kind of, either from an active engagement point of view, or again, kind of sessions like this in terms of how we kind of educate the community, is effectively to not allow you to have as low-hanging fruit. So the steps you can do to kind of, okay, here's the best practice elements you have. So do you have something where you have passwords? Do you have things like two-factor authentication, like your banks use? Sorry, I dropped in a buzzword there. But it's about these other techniques which are
okay. Well, let me stop you there.
Sorry.
No. What is a two-factor authentication password? What is it?
So two-factor is obviously consists of two elements. One is something that you know, so your password, your physical kind of keyboard at any present, and the next one is something that you have. So it's something which is, again, you possess yourself. Everyone is probably more than likely now in terms of how they use that now, in terms of banking access. You have a unique generated code every 30 seconds, and that allows you to input a brand new code. So unless someone has your physical kind of device, they cannot get that code. And that's now, the good news, again, from kind of our perspective is a lot more people are beginning to kind of take this up. And again, it's very, very useful. And in terms of security aspects, again, you need these two things together in order to kind of to work together. So two-factor authentication was something that we very much advocate. again, some people see it as being overkill because it's just another step to go through. But the offset would be in terms of a minor inconvenience against kind of downstream of that of kind of a very large inconvenience when that happens.
All right. Stephen, is there another low-hanging fruit, so something that we need to watch out for?
Definitely. I mean, it's something our class is the basics, which is keeping things like an up-to-date antivirus that's well rated and has a good performance. You know, that there's often tests like AV comparators where they run through the products on the market, and you know, not every product is the same as every other. The effectiveness of one product might only be 40-50%, whereas other products, without naming them, are up in the high 90s. And unfortunately,
you know, when it comes to products, do you get what you pay for in your world?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to say yes. I am. Sorry, I'll interrupt there again.
Very much so. When it comes to paying, it's not always the case that it is the most expensive. There are some very cost-effective products that are very effective. Without naming vendors, obviously, have a look out on the AV comparatives tests. They do these tests every month. They then run through quarterly tests, and it's quite public. And they rate them dead easy, much like you used to. He has our top-rated products, and you do see some names consistently up there. And they're the kind of ones that you want to put into your organization.
Okay.
They're always up there. They're always breaking ground.
So we've got, you know, let's be a bit more careful and professional about the password and the management of passwords. Let's make sure that, you know, we equip ourselves with the tools that are going to help us protect and prevent. Anything else that comes to mind, Stephen, as a low-hanging fruit?
Yes, certainly. Again, this is very much seen as a cost or a time center in the business, and it's keeping things up to date. Getting rid of old, outdated software, yes, it may be critical to the business, and it's been running for 20 years, 30 years. I'm well aware of some organizations that are still using MS-DOS, unfortunately, but things have moved on with those times. But it does a job for them, so they don't see it as a risk to the organization. Unfortunately, as we've seen with things like WannaCry, you get these out-of-date operating systems that have vulnerabilities. They cannot be patched, they cannot be fixed, and they're always going to be the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy way into the network. You can then sidestep, much like you see a basketball player kind of twirl around another player and get round. You've got in at the easy point and you're away. The door's wide open and they're straight into the network.
I like that basketball analogy, I have to say. It's really quite good. So now, so so we've got password, we've got, you know, protecting ourselves with the right tools. Let's be careful of our loyalty and our romantic view by using, you know, those older software, because change is always, you know, a tricky one. David, is there any other low-hanging fruit we need to be careful about?
I think yes. I mean, one aspect is around kind of again, kind of more about the human aspect. So again, not to kind of cast kind of doubt on people, but again, employees. So again, that human element. So if you have interaction with employees, so it's about understanding, okay, are they aware of their roles and responsibilities when it comes to information security and cyber security? So are the devices that they're using, are they up to date? And again, of course, this applies to the kind of the current kind of climate as well. In terms of kind of processes to how you and they handle data. So again, what access do they have as part of that? Do they have the right access permissions in place? Do you have a free-for-all in terms of your access? Is the information being removed from your network? Or again, is it very much kind of secure in its place? What happens when you kind of take employees on? So are you educating them correctly? Gets back to the kind of the cyber skills aspect as a large extent. But again, if you, again, in the current climate, if they are being furloughed, or if again, if they're obviously if they had to be let go, again, what rights and permissions do they have? Where again, in this very much kind of internet connected world, so a lot of people are seeing kind of systems which are very much available out in the outside world, used corporately. So for example, if you as an organization have use a tool like OneDrive or Dropbox, again, that will be accessible outside of the organization, outside of 9to5, outside of bricks and mortar. So again, kind of what controls, if any, do you need to kind of put in place? It's very much kind of that risk assessment aspect, which again, obviously we kind of advocate, But again, in terms of the granularity of that, again, obviously is very much dependent on the organisation.
Great.
So as
Well,
I say, that human aspect is definitely.
Yeah, that gives me a wonderful segue to ask you about then what's been happening the last month and a half, 2 months now. So let me give you a scenario. I'm on my own. I run my own business. I operate normally in the business center, and now been working from home, therefore, working remotely. Are there therefore some threats or some issues that I was not aware of because I was in the business center working a particular way, and I'm at home using my kind of home Wi-Fi and trying to get on with work? Are there things inherently, in your view, risky about that?
Can you just remind us what's happening in the world now, Pascal? We're not aware of it. I think obviously kind of it gets back to the Node VPN aspect in terms of kind of the article you kind of mentioned kind of earlier. Again, we've seen a massive ramp up in kind of clients working remotely. So again, as you could have identified, there are certain considerations. For example, is it a personal laptop? Is it a personal device that someone may be using to access kind of work-related documents and platforms, infrastructures, applications? As a result of that, what happens to that data? How secure is that device? So again, Steve mentioned before about looking at the antivirus aspect. It's very much kind of, well, you may have a corporate solution in place, you may have something which is very personal, or again, as we've seen, devices don't have any antivirus on. The antivirus is present, but it's not licensed, it's not subscribed to, so you haven't got the latest updates. From a remote access point of view, again, or organizations using VPNs, so no VPNs there before, are they connecting organizations? If they are, that presents a very big security risk because what you're having is effectively internet traffic from the internet to the flow of that device, and then of course across your network in terms of implications there. There's also aspects of capacity and demand. So again, kind of what we've again experienced certainly with some of our clients is you've now got 50 members of staff working from home, where previously you didn't have any. Is your internet connection up to it? And that itself means that people will then do workarounds to get access to certain things. So they copy files off the server. So when they're offline, they have the server. But again, they're kind of very much divorced from the actual physical network itself. So that becomes very much a problem overall. One of the things, again, that links back to, I suppose, again, the kind of the jargon aspect is around the notion of encryption. So again, if we're using personal devices, or again, even if we're using corporate devices, are those devices encrypted themselves? And again, that obviously applies to kind of now the regulatory stances about can you get support from the Information Commissioner's Office around devices, and of course GDPR, which I might we'll go to later on. But so there's kind of, again, lots of things that kind of thread together around this aspect. So because you could actually have kind of like I have with kind of my kids, I've got a kind of a laptop sitting there. Appreciate it's a completely separate network and different kind of different things there, but it's again, what is their activity there? So if I take that laptop off the kids later on and then begin to use it, where have they been? What have they done? If I start checking emails down in the network again, what are the implications there about what happens? So it's about these, again, this level of consideration. Does your fruit just begin kind of again getting lower down the scale of actually just saying, okay, well, the next time I begin to use it, I need to just like tidy that low hanging fruit again. So sorry, I don't know if it's a really good analogy, but it's
no, it really helps. So Stephen, in terms of sadly the activities of criminals out there, or people with more time in their hands than they should, have you noticed a different type of attempt at breaking into someone's virtual home in reference to COVID-19 and the pandemic?
Very much so. There is a warning out at the moment via the FBI, very much dictating to be aware of the World Health Organization as being targeted. They're very much aiming for the large drive in healthcare up in the States. And it is a very interesting one that, again, whatever's in the news, whatever's popular, whatever people are actively looking for, they're exploiting. They know it's on people's minds. They know that people are aware of it and are researching these. So you tend to find the top of Google, the AdWords are being used to drive up these malicious sites, that these have become the phishing campaigns via email. Along with other things like your old school mail. They're getting letters where, you know, he has the equivalent of the stimulus check that the Americans are doing. In reality, it's actually a loan you're signing with a new company, and they've got sky high rates on the interest of that $1,200. And unfortunately, it's borderline criminal, but the law allows them to do so. In terms of the spam, though, they are very much exploiting COVID-19. This is our updates, and then on the back of that, there's a malicious attachment. Sign in here to view, and again, they're looking for those easy-to-hit usernames and passwords. They know that you're using those passwords elsewhere. The password reuse is rife. I'll admit I've done it myself. Even on old accounts I've had 10 years ago, I've suddenly got notifications on my phone. Thankfully, the two-factor goes, are you signing in from the Ukraine or Russia or China? And you go, well, I'm definitely not. But you just wonder, where have you reused that password? How have they linked it to you? Even though that's an account that's about 5 email addresses for me personally, they've still managed to link it. And it's just an unfortunate thing. They are aiming for the law.
HMRC, I think we'll probably kind of see it soon, obviously with regards to kind of from a business point of view. Certainly with regards to that, I mean, again, from a business owner perspective, obviously we've had a kind of a flood of kind of emails from HMRC. Again, how long before, and I appreciate HMRC, you've got kind of its verification process spot on, you know, that we won't include any personal details, that sort of thing within the emails. We won't ask you to click on links, which just get in touch with us. And so it's really good how HMRC have done it. But I think, again, in terms of the, obviously in terms of the corona aspect, I suppose, again, kind of Stephen hit on the nail on the head there. Again, what we're seeing is kind of this kind of emotion override. Again, organisations themselves thinking, oh, we're kind of begin to, this looks legitimate in terms of kind of what we're being sent, what we're beginning to receive, the conversation we're beginning to have. And then, of course, that's then being jumped on the back of it. So I haven't seen any yet per se, but we can imagine in time that kind of HMRC, again, will be spoofed. So again, another kind of term there where you kind of impersonate someone. And again, I think we'll probably kind of see more of that. Again, how do we kind of begin to resolve this? Again, very much the human element. Be aware of this. Again, we've got some kind of very astute and excellent clients ourselves who kind of, again, I'll ask us to check the validation of this. Again, they know the process to kind of delete, add a junk, that sort of thing. So it hopefully never happens again. And of course, there was the technical components. So solutions now, which again, a vast majority of organizations are using around Microsoft 365, Google's G Suite, that sort of thing, where they've got very powerful kind of spam filters in themselves. But of course, things do kind of eke through as part of that. But as I say, they're riding the coattails of people's emotions and kind of current events.
No, but and I just said that it's been around for centuries, sadly. Yeah. I mean, using the analogy of Wild Wild West, you know, it's like people selling that miracle cure. It is, as people were crippled by mining. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to address our audience today. If you have any questions in and around the subject we're talking about today, please put them into the chat box. We're going to move on to the Q&A in a moment, so do feel free to type those questions. But for now, I'm going to ask you some questions, Stephen and David, and almost trying to get, I know you can't give us some direct answers and solutions because you don't understand our businesses and what we do necessarily, but some kind of signposting in the right direction. So I'm going to ask questions more about behavior before COVID-19 and then after. So before COVID-19, what is your views and reaction when someone goes into Starbucks, for example, and start working there? I'll start with an easy one.
Do you want the, well,
are you speechless? I managed to get David to actually be speechless.
Sorry, I'm looking at Stephen. I think
panic from David.
It's not a process. I mean, as someone who's an advocate of that process. So, I mean, again, transparency-wise, we've worked from home for since the 11 years. So, for us, kind of the current situation, apart from this, the social integration, it's kind of water off a duck's back. But we've done that. We've took things from an extreme perspective of saying, okay, we must have everything locked down, kind of on our homes. To okay, let's actually have a look and let's understand these rules a bit better. So we've worked at kind of both extremes. Individually, we've both got obviously kind of different interests, but again, we converge on this kind of notion of information security. So as I say, I'm very much an advocate of that, of kind of where it works. I think, however, what obviously that does for us is, and I think again, very much the aspect of public Wi-Fi itself presents itself as an opportunity and threat, for obviously two reasons. In some cases, we can't validate what that organization is. We can't, in some cases, even validate that if we walk into Starbucks, that it's actually Starbucks providing that internet connection. Again, there are other techniques which people can use, one of which is known as a honeypot attack, where people simulate that you're actually connecting to Starbucks. But in reality, you're not.
How do they do that?
So what they do is, on their laptop, they will have an external wireless connection. What happens is they'll present the Starbucks network name. So what you do is your laptop says, okay, I can see Starbucks, I'll go and connect it there. They'll spoof a screen that says, okay, Pascal, put your kind of details in here, click go. You'll then be passed through to the internet, but then they've got your email address. Then at which point, all your internet connectivity and your traffic is flowing through their machine. So again, and again, obviously from an ethical point of view, we demonstrate this in practice and process. But things like, for example, at the time, Facebook, you could actually scrape your Facebook login, so include your username and password. It's actually called a man-in-the-middle attack. So you're between kind of your device, them, and then the internet. And what actually happens is all the internet traffic passes through their device, and they begin to see that. So that's very much kind of a threat in itself. Obviously, as well, they're public environments. So it's not just kind of Pascal and David who's connected. It's Pascal and Stephen and David. Stephen could be malicious, but also likewise, Stephen may not be malicious intentionally, but Stephen may have a virus on his computer. Okay, so well, how do we, again, in some cases where we cannot prevent the fact that Stephen has to communicate with everyone else, and then of course what we have there is some kind of formal transmission. It could be, of course, again, get back to the analogy where we're using personal devices where they haven't been hardened, as kind of we call it. So all the security is very much open. So they've got Windows 10 Home on, for example, where again, a lot of things are kind of open by default. You're added to that kind of Wi-Fi network. Again, have you shared your photos with the family? If so, can I now see your photos when I log onto the Starbucks network? And chances are, yes, we can. So can I start beginning extracting some data off your devices? Have you inadvertently saved a spreadsheet into your photos folder?
So Stephen, then, what is your recommendation? Do we stop using public Wi-Fi, coffee houses and trains and so on, or do we have a system in place to prevent and protect?
I'm interested in this answer.
So just to pick up on something that Stephen Barrett said there, saying about always hotspotting to the mobile phone when they're out and about and working. Yes, that's perfect. You have a trusted device that's connected to O2 or whoever the mobile provider is, and you have a personal password on that device. No one else knows it. Hopefully they haven't seen it on the screen when they've been stood behind you, just as you've got to appreciate that there are other people in these spaces, so what are you opening? But in terms of that, get yourself onto a trusted device, something like a hotspot for a phone, or if you've got one of those MiFi dongles where it's a SIM card and it just transmits it to a Wi-Fi network, get yourself on those. You can trust them. You know that you've had the device in your possession and that it hasn't been tampered with. The issue with public Wi-Fi is there is a technical reason behind all of this. Some Wi-Fis are very good. Certain vendors set them up by default where you can't see another device. You try and communicate with that other device, they're stopping this spoof attack. They know that there are other networks out there and they have dedicated defense radios that stops these spoofs. You try and connect to this wrong access point, it will drop you off from the wrong access point and try and prevent you from ever touching it. In terms of the guest Wi-Fis though, some of these guest Wi-Fis are wide open. You can literally, I've went to a hotel myself, turned my laptop on, and you can just scan the network. There are certain hotels when I've been out and about in the UK where you go far and wide, you run the scan and you can see their front desk computer. You can see their server that you know is processing and holding the details of all of the staff, all of the workers who come in and deal with it are busy talking over that network to that server. When they're pulling payments, it's
so is that what you do in your spare time? You just run scans when you travel around?
That's what he does. I'm not gonna lie, that's what he does.
It's a legal line. So at the point where you actually interact with it, that's when it becomes illegal. Observing it and not interacting with it, you get to observe that maybe these things aren't up to scratch. Maybe it's a bit of a worry that my credit card details are sitting with these card terminals on the same network.
Could I ask, the scan that you run, is it something that, forgive me, only specialists like you have access to? Or
5 minutes on Google and you can get these tools.
there's other things just I think by default. So it kind of Macs. I appreciate you've got a Mac as well, Pascal as well. But again, Macs and Windows by default, they begin to scan the network. So they'll, I don't know if you've noticed before, if you look in Finder, for example, on a Mac, if you go to a public space and you connect to a public Wi-Fi, you'll see all the devices on the left-hand side in Finder. Within Windows, it's exactly the same. If you went to network, it just begins to kind of, again, there's the plug-and-play technology, which was introduced kind of in the mid-2000s, kind of more widespread. It's obviously got its pros and cons. It's great in the home environment. So yeah, I want to see where my Sonos player is, or where my kind of streaming TV is. It's great, but of course the same applies. Again, it's this aspect of kind of the personal device in the workspace and vice versa. Again, the same rules apply. So it's about that. So again, from a remediation point of view, is okay, do we switch that off? Do we not use it? And again, because we've got so many options around in terms of kind of what's best and what's not. Again, it's okay. Kind of where's my fruit? How low hangs my fruit again?
So unfortunately, time is against us. We need to bring this first segment almost to a close. So I've got one last question. Then I will ask my friend Stephen Fennick to read out some of the questions we have in the chat room. Other scenario for you, which I think is building on what you mentioned a moment ago. I've got obviously a business, I've got my own premises and so on, and sometimes we have a guest that comes in and said, oh, can I hot desk for a bit before I go to my next meeting? And then we share obviously our Wi-Fi login details with someone that is external to the business, because we are very nice people. But do you see a risk inherent in doing that?
Yes. In terms of obviously what that means is that, again, if it's the same kind of flat structure in terms of your Wi-Fi, so obviously what that means is that if you have access to your server, again, in that way, you then give that same password so that person participates in the same network you're participating on. They've now got access to your server. And yes, there may be passwords in there, and yes, they may be great. However, of course, there may be kind of other implications. Certainly, again, in terms of some of the regulatory kind of components, they recommend that obviously that doesn't happen, that you have two different networks that provide that. As you say, in some cases, it's kind of nigh on impossible to do that. Because of course you may only have a single router, you only have certain environments. But then again, it's okay, well, upstream of that, if we do have a server at the end of that, okay, is it password protected? Can anybody just kind of rummage around it? Is it open to everyone in terms of permissions and shares and that sort of thing? So again, it's not necessarily saying, okay, let's kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's understand, okay, kind of again, that element of risk and equally of threat. What does that actually kind of look like for us? So have we tested it? Have we just kind of got a brand new laptop or another laptop in here, put it in here, and try and access components of your kind of network? It's those kind of, again, considerations where certainly we've seen organizations come afoul of that. So it's those aspects.
And I think it's back to what you were saying earlier. It's behavior. We want to be kind. We want to be generous. We want to be hospitable, because emotions are running high at the moment. I get an email from my local, clinic or surgery. I'm going to read it, and they're asking me to make an appointment, even though it's not them because they've been spoofed and so on. And it's just, I made one mistake, quite recently, because I was rushing, I clicked, and it was almost moments later I went, oh, that wasn't them. That wasn't PayPal. I think it was PayPal. It wasn't at all. But because I was rushing and I got a bit irritated with being distracted by PayPal. So I think we need to just keep in check our emotions, even though some of them are very sincere and honest. So Stephen, before we move on to the question from our audience today, are you able to summarize for us maybe the key essentials when it comes to the mitigating actions we can take, the simple steps, adjustments we can take in terms of our behavior and the technology to protect and prevent?
It's dead easy. It's always starting back with the basics. So make sure you've got a good protection platform, good antivirus. If you're willing to go up the next step, there is a bit of software called an ADR, or an endpoint detection response. I wouldn't expect someone to personally have that level of virus protection, but basically it will monitor what is going on your device. You've opened this funny attachment, what has it touched thereafter and worked with. So you can at least find out what has happened when you've opened that attachment and what it's actually touched on your network. And
what did you call that again? Sorry.
Endpoint detection and response.
Endpoint detection and response. People can Google that, yeah.
Yes. So whereas typically you can pay £30–40 a year for antivirus, those sorts of products do roll into sort of £5 and £10 a month. So it's not a cheap cost, but it's something where you can guarantee they are logging everything that's happening on your computer. They know that, you know, this malicious PDF supposedly from an invoicing company has been opened. It touched this file on the server, and that's kind of where you can start to remediate and know exactly what happened. In terms of that, it's always patching. Patch your devices, keep them up to date. Those phone updates that you've been ignoring, that the prompt's very annoying with, please do them. iPhones are very much updating them in the night, and it's a much easier process for iPhone users.
If only they can make them more interesting and exciting when we receive them, you know.
And not too long, not as long. I think that's a part of the problem.
Well, it is that it always falls back to time. People don't have time to step away from the computers. They're always busy. And they've got a fear that these updates are going to fail and then the device becomes unusable. As IT companies, we've got to take the handle of, we've got to update them, we've got to protect these devices. These vulnerabilities are no longer, you know, shots in the dark where they might get exploited. They are exploiting them actively. There's a flaw out at the moment for iPhone that hasn't been patched, whereby if you receive a certain email on Mail as an app, they can actually root the phone and have full control of it. They can then delete the email that came in. You would never have a trace of it. And they get full control of a device literally by sending an email, and it gets opened by the device. Not even that you've interacted with it as a user. The patch for that is coming. I expect that in a week or two. And hopefully that should be the end of that version of it. Once it's patched, fingers crossed, there will always be more patches because there's always vulnerabilities.
Stephen, we've got a quick query and we'll move on to all the other questions with my colleague Stephen Fenning. But Pamela asking, can you repeat the name again? It was called Endpoint?
Yes, Endpoint. Sorry, I'll type it in as well.
Brilliant.
Endpoint detection and response.
So you know, really, the reason why I was so keen to have both of you with us to almost start a conversation we're going to have for as long as we're trading is, I do believe that it is part of what we need to do to inform ourselves, educate ourselves, take it as far as, you know, is sensible as a business owner manager with different talent and skill set. But if we want to be a digital business, in addition to the sales and marketing and operation and online customer service and all those things, let's do what we can. And so far, I'll ask, you know, the feedback from the attendees, but I've not heard anything from you that seems difficult or not attainable, if that makes any sense. But Stephen Fennick, the other Stephen, do we have any questions or comment from our attendees joining us live today?
We certainly do, Pascal.
Right.
Quite a few actually. So let's get rolling. Great webinar so far, guys, by the way. Really, really interesting. I'm enjoying it. So Stephen asked a little while ago, well, more of a comment really, that he's finding it quite annoying that he's getting quite a lot of spam emails coming through his Magento website contact page. So I suppose just to kind of phrase that into a question, how would you, I mean, it's probably going to be quite difficult, but how would you go about kind of preventing that, or, you know, kind of preventing it as much as possible?
Do you want me to get this one on?
David, yeah. I'll start with David, then Stephen, you can get the next one.
So there's probably two things around that. So obviously with Magento being a kind of a plug-in kind of style CMS, again, like WordPress, there are elements of which you could enable so that there's a verification process which happens as part of the kind of the request more information, find more information, email more details, that component as well. So there's certainly some elements we could do, you could kind of suggest around there. The other aspect again is around potentially email system that has been used and in place. One of the questions could be, of course, is could you put particular rules in place to say, okay, well, we know it's from this. Can we validate that the sender is from this kind of organization? However, I suppose kind of the trouble you may be having is around the exposure of the current plugin that you have for capturing information on the Magento site. So again, we've had a fair bit of experience where people have used plugins that don't validate. So again, we could put a spurious email address in there, and it doesn't follow any rules. So as a result, it just gets the request and then sends it across.
What kind of validation, sorry, would you see fit into have? What kind of validation would work?
Yeah. I mean, if we looked at a traditional email, so going slightly off piece, I suppose there, traditional email, you would say, okay, well, am I expecting any emails from China, as Stephen said before, or are we expecting kind of emails from Russia or Ukraine? If not, don't send them. So again, kind of quarantine those emails. So that would happen very much at a mail server element. Again, in terms of plugins, we're aware, obviously, from a WordPress point of view, there are some fairly powerful ones that kind of reduce the spam. And I'm just wondering if it's a case, certainly from a website point of view, that it's looking at, okay, can you swap out the kind of current contact us, get in touch sort of form, which does this element of verification. I think, again, there are obviously kind of a lot of free tools that do this as well. It's free ones which have been validated, again, equally, certainly from a WordPress point of view and a Magento point of view, that may not be validated. So it's kind of a, again, kind of do your research and do your kind of due diligence around kind of some elements of tools that may be used.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Next question for Stephen, please.
Yes, and we've had Charlotte and Simon ask, does Apple need antivirus? Obviously, it's quite a robust operating system. We then had Chris just chip in to say that he uses AVG on his MacBook Pro. And just a peace of mind, really, feels that it does regular scans, blocks any threats. So what's your take on that, guys?
Yes, please use it. It's not only protecting you, it's protecting your other devices that are on the network and anyone you're contacting. Even though Macs aren't as susceptible to malware, it does happen, but they are not the low-hanging fruit in this situation. Mac is not sitting with the market penetration and the use that Windows devices are, but they do still get them. They are still a target because they know that they tend to be more affluent users. They tend to have systems that are more well connected with business systems. In terms of what the antivirus tends to do as well, it'll also scan for malware that works on Windows devices. So even though you might have a bit of Windows malware on your Mac as a file, that might not necessarily mean that when you're sharing it with another person, they don't have a Windows device. You might think it's a totally innocent PDF and it doesn't work on Mac. And then when you find out you've sent it to your colleague who is using a Windows device, it's actually malicious. So those antiviruses are searching for both Mac malware and they are also searching for Windows malware. In protecting every device is kind of the key ideal on this.
And so back to what you were saying, if I was to select a tool, a solution that I'm going to pay monthly or as a one-off annual fee, your preference would be for a tool that does virus and malware, as opposed to just the antivirus?
These days it's elevated up to, they include modules such as phishing, they include modules such as web filters, and you can protect yourselves from these malicious domains. The kind of comparison that's always used in the security industry, it's like layers of an onion. You've got your antivirus. If you then search for bad websites, you've got another layer because you can't get to those bad websites and get the malicious file. So even if the antivirus engine can't cope with it, at least the web filter has blocks you get into that potential attachment that's nasty. You also tend to find they've got things built in on certain modules. There are certain vendors where once you're on a banking website, they actually put the banking website in what's called a sandbox. It's totally isolated. It's protected in its own right. These kind of layers of modules with certain vendors is where you're seeing the more comprehensive protection. Doing as many things as possible will elevate you to the point where you're not the easy target anymore. You're not leaving your car doors open at night or your front door unlocked all day, and that makes it harder for them to get to you. Same with the spam protection. You tend to find that Office 365 and G Suite or Google Apps, as they also call them, they've got really good filtering systems. But again, at an admin level, they need to be tweaked and set up, and they'll become more effective. You'll start to see a reduction of these spam and nasty emails that you're getting all the time.
Sorry, Pascal, can I just add, obviously, I mentioned before about kind of the aspect of kind of diligence around kind of certain components that you may use. And as you say, that this is probably kind of one of the easier ways to kind of, again, obviously kind of understand and ensure kind of what it is you're doing. I don't know if anybody's aware, but Avast is an antivirus product. Obviously, kind of what kind of came out recently, kind of certainly inside the industry, was some of the nefarious activities that Avast had actually undertaken. So Avast themselves, again, as a trusted antivirus provider, were actually kind of downloading data and from the actual machines themselves. And I think again, it was kind of, there was obviously linked somewhere else. But so rather than what was obviously deemed a trusted kind of product, and in some cases this is where Zoom has been kind of trusted again, where they're in the press recently as well. So again, something that we trust them are using every day, but again, there is something kind of, as I say, nefarious and something underpinning as part of that. So I think again, from a tool selection, again, while we could obviously kind of recommend obviously kind of some kind of best cases, again, appreciate that may not be for everyone in terms of kind of how business may be configured. But again, the recommendation would be, again, is do some due diligence, which I think is what Steve was kind of inferring before about look at these tools, look at kind of where they are. Again, and obviously in this case, ironically, Google is your friend with regards to that. So.
Next question, please, Stephen.
No problem. Thank you, guys. Yes, so I think Pamela makes a really good point here, which I think you guys will almost certainly agree with. What she believes is that cybersecurity is not a case of fire prevention. Is it not a case of fire prevention instead of firefighting? She's had experience of people not updating their software and not realizing the protection value of it. So I think that's quite a good point, and probably something you'll agree with.
If I can take the kind of the fire kind of analogy a little bit, I think that there's always a smoldering fire somewhere, and I think at some point there are fuels which can be added to that, which obviously again make it kind of a bigger fire. So it is a perfect comment, because it's again, as Stephen alluded to before, something which may, and I suppose we're getting labouring the cost element now, or again time, even if we use time as a cost, if something which takes 5 minutes now, it may prevent you kind of an hour, 2 hours later on. Plus, likewise, something which kind of takes 5 minutes now may prevent you from £5,000, £10,000 later on. So I wholeheartedly agree. As I say, the only thing I would probably kind of add to that would be to say, well, there's always a smouldering component there somewhere. And it can ready to kick off at any point. So our iPhones now could be kind of perfectly up to date, but tomorrow they may be out of date. And again, it's that currency aspect about how up to date are they.
Thank you. Stephen, next question, please.
Yes. So Nariko's just saying that she uses the free version of WordFence plugin on her WordPress website, which is WooCommerce. Do you think if the free version of WordFence plugin is safe enough to run on a website?
Yes, they're very much selling a solution, and they don't want to take their name. It is a solution we've used with customers before, especially when they don't have a budget to protect themselves, and it does have a basic level of protection that is beyond the normal install. You've got another layer there. You've got a protection against certain levels of spam, people attempting passwords on the website, and having that extra level of protection is always a good thing.
Smashing. Thanks. Next, please, Stephen.
Yes, just Rachel asking. She's had a few phishing emails. However, last week she received one whereby they knew the password that you had from a few years ago. Do you know how they might have got that information? I know that's quite, potentially quite a difficult question, but maybe you might have some ideas.
Oh yeah, feel free to jump on this one. So effectively what happened is that password would have been reused somewhere some time ago. And what then have happened is that site itself would have been compromised. So what they'll have done is say, okay, if we use LinkedIn, obviously was kind of hacked several years ago, and there was a lot of information taken from LinkedIn. What will happen is that password that would be used on LinkedIn would have been reused somewhere else. So effectively what they tend to do is say, well, we know you've got this email address, you're still using it now. This was the password you had at the time, and we're going to bet 9 out of 10 times you're going to still be using that same password somewhere else. And they send it across. I imagine at some point it wouldn't be a very nice email in terms of kind of threats to friends and family with regards to activity you may or may not have taken on your laptop, because we've seen a few of those, but that's the reason why. In terms of this, and I don't know if this kind of helps Pascal in terms of kind of what we can do, there's actually, again, a very good kind of open source kind of website seeing how I've been pwned. Again, kind of very much kind of geek speak there, but effectively that will give, you can type in your email address and it'll tell you if your email address has been used in any hacks internationally. So and then it says, okay, well, this is the attack that was used in, this is the system that was hacked, but also likewise, this is the password that they used. So they've got access to. So if we can put that in the chat or use that later on, that would be very useful to us, for everyone to see it.
So what is it called again?
I've just chucked in the chat there to the panelists.
Thank you very much.
But just to give some background on this website as well, it's run by a guy called Troy Hunt, who's over in sunny Australia. Lucky him. But he's worked with the security industry for years. He quite often gets on the forefront of these breaches. I mean, at the moment, they're sitting with nearly 10 billion accounts and passwords where they can tell you you've been checked against. And that's it. it is just a drop in the ocean though. So if you know that there's been a password emailed, please change it anywhere you can think of. You can be going back years at this point, because we all have a digital footprint, old email addresses on Yahoo or AOL back in the day. And unfortunately, we can't ever really guarantee that is 100% with the certainty where they've got your password from. Especially with, you might have just used it once on a webinar or on a quick sign-up website, and unfortunately they may well have been hacked down the line. Just to give some examples, some of these breaches are major organizations such as Adobe, LinkedIn, and you can imagine the scale of the amount of professionals that are using these sites, and to have those professional websites with a work email address. And not only that, you can then trace where they are now on LinkedIn. You can then find out, right, they're now with this corporation down the road or this charity, and they're now reusing the same password. So they just update the details to this person's email address and use it.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question, please, Stephen.
No problem. And we've had a couple of the guys talking about hotspots. Obviously, I think we covered that quite a lot. But just for clarity, just to kind of paraphrase all that together, you guys would obviously recommend using mobile data hotspots as opposed to public Wi-Fi, if possible.
Yes. Again, for the deployments where we've had clients who are linked to the public sector, again, we've recommended that. So whether they've been peripatetic, they've been kind of in a wide variety of locations, we've recommended use hotspots. And again, we discussed things with kind of Vodafone in terms of how things were kind of enabled then, obviously, which was the provider at the time, and they said, yeah, fine, it's kind of the security is kind of guaranteed. I think, again, as Stephen said, alluded to before, in terms of kind of sharing that password, in terms of that component, either rotate the password on your device or don't give out the password. That would be the advice there.
Thanks. Next one, please, Stephen.
Fantastic. So Pamela just saying that, what are your thoughts about ESET, endpoint bundle, antivirus? Currently, I've not seen any data breaches, touch wood, and that's with over 500 users for over a year. What's your thoughts on that? Have you heard of that?
Yes, it's definitely one of the better solutions out in the market. Since we are getting at names, our personal preference is always Bitdefender. They have a multi-layered approach, but ESET also offers that level of protection. They are a vendor we've engaged with, and I was very impressed with them, yes.
Excellent.
Here you go. Next, please, Stephen.
And you also just mentioned malware bytes as well. Any thoughts on that software?
I'll take this one again then. So yes, it's a good solution, but it isn't what you would class as your typical antivirus. They aren't looking for the same sort of indicators as what the other engines are, although it does often find things that the antivirus engines aren't looking for. They do tend to focus more on potentially unwanted programs, to add a buzzword, which is things like browser redirections when you go into Google. So you type your search site and it's not taking you to Google, it's taking you to, you know, a fake Google where they're getting paid to redirect your traffic to. It is one of those solutions where you can use it in conjunction with another antivirus. So if you want to add another layer to it, yes, feel free to use Malwarebytes. Even if you do just use the free edition and don't pay them, feel free to run a scan on occasion. You'll probably find something. It might just be something minor, but it's definitely worth to get that validation.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other comments or questions, please, Stephen?
Yeah, a couple of last ones, I think, guys. Just Charlotte saying here, she has a Shopify website. Should I be doing anything to back that up or protect it? Or is that already taken care of by Shopify?
I've got this one. I'm a big fan of Shopify. So in terms of kind of what they do, again, in terms of certainly from an e-commerce point of view, I think it's a kind of an all-in-one solution. So it's, as I say, kind of a big fan of it. It's all taken care of by Shopify. I think, again, the only change of that would be in terms of if you export anything from Shopify. So appreciate, of course, you'll have your orders in there, you'll have your products, you'll have, again, potentially, obviously, customer email addresses and details. I think the consideration would then be if you've got anything offline in terms of download it to your device, is either delete that if you don't use it anymore, or again, save that to a place where you may need it. As I say, kind of an email, again, someone getting access to from that perspective. If you're taking orders and it's got, again, full name and details, as we know, kind of Shopify can kind of take, just be wary of what you're taking out of the platform and kind of where that's being stored.
Yeah, very sensible. Thank you very much. Was there anything else at all from the chat room, Stephen?
Of last ones, guys. Stephen Barrett's just making a comment here that he had somebody set up a spoof of his website. They were a .com instead of .co.uk. He traced the domain to GoDaddy and emailed them about it, but they refused to do anything about it. So quite worrying.
It's a very interesting one, and it's definitely one that we see all the time. Usually they do get shut down because it's an impersonation of someone big, such as Microsoft or IBM or another organization that have large legal teams behind them. If it's definitely GoDaddy who's hosting the domain, they do usually have an abuse at email address, and I believe yep, they have a phishing at GoDaddy.com, and they also have malware at GoDaddy.com and abuse at GoDaddy.com. But you will be able to contact what they class as their administration addresses, and it's usually much more helpful than the support lines. The support lines tend to get hit with, you know, I've lost a website, I paid a web developer, and that they're not giving me the domain. Unfortunately, they know not to engage with those kind of queries, whereas ones that are actively pretending to be you, you can lodge a complaint against them officially.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thanks everyone for the question. That brings it alive and makes it just more kind of concrete for all of us. So I'd like to move on to segment 2 in the time that we've got left together. And this is more my reflection on, thank you, by the way, for all the great advice you've given us. You know, I feel I would be able to take informed actions to mitigate and remove the low-hanging fruits and remove the kind of the way in for people, either that be accidental or criminal. But I suppose I wanted to reflect on the discussion that we had offline before this session on what does best practice look like in 2020, 2021 for all of us as we're becoming better equipped to deal with online threats. And from memory, you were talking about, you know, 3 key elements. So can I begin with you, David? And what is, in your view, best practice? What does it look like moving forward?
I think one of the things, I suppose, if we look at kind of the regulatory bodies, I think it kind of, if we had their first, like, so there's obviously now, in terms of kind of how things have been established, we, in terms of the regulatory aspect, one is about kind of the Information Commissioner's Office. So that itself is about, do you process any personal data? So they themselves provide a lot of information with regards to how you can conduct yourself with regards to cybersecurity, regardless of the size of your organization and regardless if you're kind of a person or organization. Their remit is about the security of information that pretty much pertains to individuals. That's very much kind of their remit. Or again, where information which is processed about informations. What they then do is they've then dovetailed themselves into GDPR. So if you know, kind of GDPR came, it was very much kind of Y2K, how big will this be, kind of how small will it be, what are the implications? And in some cases there are, depending on the organizational size, there are some big implications, some big kind of thought processing, thought provocations that kind of need to happen as part of this implementation. But so likewise, it's about, again, have you followed your due diligence? Are you doing the right things in terms of that process? So certainly in terms of our, how they dovetail together, in terms of getting support from the ICO, which I think, if it's okay with you, Stephen, I think if you give a kind of a real world example where you've had to get in touch with the ICO and the processes there. But again, the ICO won't provide you any support if, for example, one key element is not fulfilled, and that key element is about encryption. So if you have a device which you leave in a coffee shop, which is not encrypted, the ICO will not give you any support or help around that in terms of kind of their process. So in terms of how we kind of, again, kind of how we link that kind of process together is, are you kind of following guidance that's promoted by GDPR? In order for you to kind of participate fully within GDPR, to say yes, we have either a tick box up to say yes, we are observing the requirements with regards to GDPR, we need to have encrypted devices, which the ICO support. But obviously that in itself is then all underpinned by obviously kind of ISO standards. So there are effectively kind of international standards, which we're not advocating obviously kind of organizations to go out and just say yes and embark on this project and let's do this. But there are certain guidelines, there are certain controls, as they call them, which are deemed as best practice to say, okay, can we follow this? So have we looked at password policies? So again, kind of how we got easy passwords, strong passwords. In terms of our email, is it protected? Do we have these things in place? Do we have encryption in place? So a lot of the kind of the risks and kind of we identified kind of earlier in this session. Again, there are certainly kind of controls in place which help govern these. That admittedly is obviously spawned a kind of entire industry on the back of that, where they're not being, they'd be very much kind of technical driven in terms of solutions. That's enabled that kind of industry to kind of grow. But at the same time, there are some kind of very much some rich pickings from this, which could be applied to organizations of any size, whether or not be kind of one-man organizations up to kind of a conglomerate level. So there are certain kind of elements between it. So for me, I suppose to finalize, it would be the ICO, asking anybody if they do kind of process any information, please register with the ICO. It's £30 per year.
Can I just ask, no, sincerely, what is meant when you say processing information? What is meant by that?
Good question. So that could be, are we storing information anywhere about our clients? Are we still storing any, and with that, are we then doing something with that information? So what we've done first is we've processed it, we've looked at that data, we've used that data for a purpose to do something. So that could be processing an order. We're storing some information about Pascal. Here is Pascal's name and address. Here's his email address. We're now converting his order into a fulfilled order, if we use the Shopify example before. So we've kind of gone through that process. We've got something about Pascal, where he lives, something about him, and we've done something to that data. So we process his data. We take it from a state of kind of being something which is digital, and we've actioned upon that data. And that itself, obviously, again, could be followed through. Again, much of the aspects around information security is about the aspect of data processing effectively. Who has that data? Who has access to that data? Who is doing something with it? Is that financial data? And
just to cut to the chase, I suppose, is it possible to run a business nowadays without processing data?
No, because again, because you've got invoices, so again, you've got supplier details within there. If you've got employees, again, prime example, even if it's just one employee, and whether that be your spouse, you kind of someone in your immediate family, you've got their personal details. So again, hypothetically, and this is kind of the type of debate that we tend to have, is what happens when this data is lost? Whether that be kind of in a system which is on your local device. What if you're using a third-party tool to run your payroll? That gets hacked. It can kind of all these kind of aspects of where it is. The analogy that Stephen said before about the onion doesn't just apply to kind of the technical aspect. Again, it gets linked to the business itself in terms of its information security, which then applies, of course, to individuals. So is it one individual, just 10 individuals? So we kind of see this kind of mushroom and grow. As I said before, kind of the ICO registration, it's £30 per year. Again, depending on organisation size, turnover, that sort of thing. But they've upped it now, I think, to £40. Sorry. But again, that's just it's like for us how we treat that. It's very much like your employer liability certificate. So again, obviously a lot of businesses kind of have this kind of stuck up. For us, is okay if you have this side by side. It again gives this air that you're kind of caring about the data that you have because it is personal. It can be used for nefarious kind of purposes. But again, it's just whilst you care about your employees and care about kind of the data that you may have about them, or again, likewise, clients.
Super. No, thanks for that. It's a very good reminder for all of us. So that's an element of the new normal and best practice. Stephen, is there something else that comes to mind that would become part of what we need to embrace more as all managers of businesses?
Kind of the logic of it is going to happen at some point. So what we would typically class it as an IT side is kind of disaster planning. It's around what steps you will take to remediate it, what you'll do to fix it, how you're going to handle an incident when it does actually occur. Much like your building burns down and you've got a plan for, let's move down the road to the coffee shop. you need to have a plan for what happens when you have an outbreak or a staff member opens a phishing email and does chuck their credentials into it. When you've got these things planned and rehearsed, you can get them down to minutes in terms of fixing them. Whereas when they happen and you're not prepared, you can be talking hours just to know, well, how do I look at this? Okay, I need to go here, and then you're down another rabbit warren of what's gone on over here. Like I say, a lot of these EDR solutions or other solutions such as security operations center backed software, they monitor these for you. They tell you, John Smith has opened an email and we've detected that someone's trying to log in from China. You do tend to find these monitored solutions are a lot of money in terms of when you add the resource to actually monitor them and tackle these incidents. But we are starting to see a massive drive down in cost to even just a few pounds a month, and you can monitor exactly what's running on the computers, what it's touching and working with, and you get actionable intel and fixes on these devices. There are other solutions that monitor your Office 365 instances, and they will tell you that we've had unexpected logins. Are you expecting someone from China to log into the CEO's account? No, it's been hacked. So therefore they lock them out of the system. There will be a drive to kind of, get these solutions in place as time goes on. It's something we've seen, especially with the ICO, if you've got PCI compliance because you've got card terminals, or even if you're subscribing to ISO 27001 or one of the information security standards, the layers need to come in, the need to protect the data. You need to be able to say what happened with the data. You need to be able to validate that that data hasn't left the organization, or if it has, where it went to. And it's very much a layered approach with things like data loss prevention tools. They know where the data is, they protect the data, they encrypt the data. And those sort of solutions are going to become very commonplace, even down on the small business level. That's our goal in 5 and 10 years, that the solutions are there, everyone has them. And in reality, we're going to work ourselves out with a job, hopefully, eventually. Sorry to say that, David, but that is the goal, because if we can better everyone's approach to it, it's going to become harder and harder for the criminals. It's far too easy to smash a window on a car and walk out with, you know, a laptop. If it's not encrypted, your data's out there.
Yeah, there was another element to best practice, David, that you mentioned to me, which is this idea of almost like all digital skills, except that it's going to change and move on with the times, and therefore be prepared to educate yourself on an ongoing basis and make regular adjustment to your practices.
Yeah. I think because as again kind of mentioned kind of earlier, I think the focus, of course, is that criminals aren't going to change. In terms of kind of what people can do kind of with that data, that's not going to change. Regardless of kind of that's in kind of a pre-COVID world or kind of a post-COVID world, that will again continually progress. I think Stephen kind of again kind of alluded there. There are these kind of again these changing trends. Certainly, kind of in the last kind of 11 years, we've seen kind of massive changes in terms of how organizations may or may not adopt certain processes, again, how they change themselves. So again, we've obviously got long-standing clients where kind of in their infancy, they were very kind of, they had a very healthy risk appetite, shall we say. And again, obviously, as they begin to kind of grow themselves, they said, okay, well, actually, we need to kind of look at our risk appetite in all aspects of the business. Of course, that includes our information security, our cyber security, and the components as a result of that. So there is something about kind of, as you say, the kind of the self-education component, where again, if we can help with that just by kind of running more of these sessions, perhaps just that sort of thing again, or again, if Stephen alluded before about this kind of self-education, about again being aware of kind of where things are, if we can point you to different resources, different websites that say, okay, well, have you done this? Have you checked this? Again, that just becomes a kind of a signpost to say, well, this is beginning to become best practice. There's some excellent practitioners out there, and again, there's a lot of people out there who kind of just do for the thrill of the chase, very much like ourselves. And again, which kind of again, as we've mentioned before, our goal is to not do this in kind of like 5, 10, 15 years because everyone's doing it. It becomes the best practice. So rather than have someone external say, well, okay, this is how best practice should be, it should be, well, no, in reality, we're doing it this way. One example I kind of always kind of apply right now in terms of kind of the reward is I'm slowly becoming kind of an expert on HR. So I'm not an HR expert in any ways, but again, kind of where we are now, I have to be. Again, that's kind of where other people may kind of say, well, I've already had this knowledge in HR because as a business owner, kind of this is how we progressed it. But again, I'm kind of doing the firefighting bit where kind of these things have happened now. Well, actually asking the question, well, is everything there in place, and kind of have I kind of followed those processes and procedures? The same applies to kind of information security. It's that same aspect from a business leader perspective. It's this kind of this polymath approach. We need to have kind of all these different skills and approaches. And information security it's not kind of a natural evolution. It's been very much kind of just kind of shoehorned in there because it has to be. It's kind of emerged more or less overnight in terms of how the techniques have been applied. And I think this kind of this constant learning, this constant evolution, this constant reconfiguration of the organization in response to kind of cyber criminals is obviously kind of one of the better ways to go. Examples which have been given so far have been excellent because, yeah, we've thought, again, the question which have been asked is, we've asked about security, we've thought about security. So they're very much kind of on this journey, this hellish journey that is information security.
No, I'm with you because, I mean, it's complex enough and demanding enough as it is to run your own business. And there's immense pleasure in, of course, taking, control of your destiny and offering an amazing service out there. And we can do without the inconvenience of losing hours and days dealing with something that really on occasion is no fault of our own. It's just, I mean, I think that the radio program yesterday was the guest was making good sense, saying, you will become a victim at some stage. We hope it doesn't happen, but you will become a victim, and that's where you are. And I think all too often we can feel guilty because something that we haven't done. But when you've done everything, and yet the criminal mind has managed to kind of win on this occasion. But back to your point, Stephen, but you've got a plan for that. You've got a plan for incidents that can happen around the house, around the building, and so on and so forth, and you have one for that. So I'm going to turn to our audience again, and we're going to move on to the end of that segment number 2. So if you have some additional questions or thoughts you want to share, please put them in the chat box, making sure you choose panelists and all attendees so we can all see that, and I will invite Stephen to read them out. But I was kind of so I spent time wondering about what's happening with the world of online marketing and online customer service. That's my specialism. I'm wondering, I think I know the answer to that, whether you're spending time looking at the near future of your particular specialism and industry. And I wonder whether you had any thoughts and reflection, and I'll begin with you, Stephen, about what's around the corner for you, the type of work you're doing, and maybe how you might face different threats altogether, and maybe you're going to have different solutions for it.
Yeah, I mean, to take the fire analogy from earlier, it is very much a fire hose. The amount of information coming out of the industry is unreal. Even if you just sign up to Twitter and follow the information security side of things, there is a lot of activity. There's a lot of change on the ground all the time. In terms of that, it's just the comprehensive approach of layering the solutions. I know I've said it before, but getting these things in and then having them validated, that's where the future is going to be. If you've done PCI compliance, you'll all know when you've had your card terminals put into the network that they've done a network scan against you. They'll use terms like CDE, the card data environment, and things like that to basically dictate, yes, you've done these tasks. We know the terminals are isolated, and we know that we've scanned your network. They know that there are no vulnerabilities, and then if you do have them, it's just remediating them. It's the remediation that's becoming the big aspect. And unfortunately, some of these old solutions, they're very expensive to replace, but on the other side, some of them are very easy hits that get you a lot of change and a lot of more security on the doors of things. Just to give you an example as well, we had a customer who was sitting there with legacy equipment. They hadn't upgraded for about 15 years, and they just kept the same wireless points, the same network infrastructure. Unfortunately, they had some employees who were very apt at getting around the protections that were there, and they were using these to do things that you potentially don't want on a business network, such as torrenting. Things like next generation firewalls is the next step, because they can monitor this sort of traffic. They can prevent this sort of traffic from going on and off of your network. And when you're able to go back and say, yes, we prevented this, you can then find the root cause and deal with it. It might be a person, it might be a bit of an old bit of hardware that you've realized, oh, we've had this squirreled away in the ceiling tiles, and no one ever realized. But you will find aspects that need improvement on every level.
For those of us who are not sure, what is the role of a firewall? How does that work?
It is your gateway to the internet. It is your final piece of protection before you're out there. Mm-hmm. And you get a whole scale of them, from just basic, these are packet filters, so they deal with the bits of data that are flying around the network, and then it comes to them, all the way up to the next generation firewalls, and what they would class as the UTM suite, where they're checking the DNS query for google.com or google.co.uk. Is it a malicious domain? Are we aware of any sort of traffic going back? They're doing checks to see, is there a botnet at this Russian IP, and it goes yes, and it blocks it. It's also doing web filtering and interception and antivirus scans of the content before it even hits your device. So all you get is extra layers to the protection. And those extra layers are obviously what we're all looking for. We hope that these extra layers are going to prevent, because it's always an if. It's always going to be if this happens. And all we can hope for is that we minimize the loss.
Thank you very much. David, any reflection on the near future for you guys?
Seem very doom and gloom. But I think it's kind of one of the things we're trying to kind of obviously kind of to move away is just kind of painting this picture of kind of dystopia. No, I think it's certainly not a way. I think from a feature point of view, I think obviously and everyone will have heard obviously the aspects of kind of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Obviously, we'll enter an era where it's not done by the human directly. It'll be about kind of people plugging away. As you said before, the bots in terms of kind of the articles you kind of pulled up before in terms of how they've been recommended to you. So imagine to the case where people will begin to see your online activities. They'll know that you switch out your kind of laptop on at 9. You go for a kind of a stroll at 11 o'clock. They'll begin to kind of realize this in terms of your habitual kind of habits. So they begin to kind of target, it's become more effective. So once it was now done by a human to kind of scour through certain things, will all be done by very much the machine component. I think one of the other things that's probably kind of on the horizon, which could be deemed as kind of both a kind of a risk, but also likewise an opportunity, is the cloud migration. So where once upon a time we may have had solutions kind of which are very much kind of deemed inside our organizations on our devices, we have the ability now to obviously kind of leverage that within the cloud. From a opportunity point of view, that's great. You know, there's kind of less risk inside the organization. However, of course, we always say that a cloud is just someone else's server somewhere else in the world. So in some cases that could be okay, again, about the due diligence of the supplier you're using. Again, likewise, what controls might be in place to stop that being kind of accessed by everyone. But also likewise, there could be some case about the actual misconfiguration of moving to the cloud. It's very easy to just kind of click next in terms of cloud infrastructures and cloud systems and services. But does that leave a kind of a gaping black hole somewhere for someone just to kind of to pile in and to use that? So certainly kind of how the future of that kind of looks as well. We think that kind of, as I say, presents itself as both a kind of a risk and an opportunity in terms of kind of where things are headed. So
I mean, my world of online marketing, online customer service is kind of looking with great interest at AI and machine learning and automation, the promise of making life easier and more relevant to many of us. Is that also part of the consideration when it comes to cybersecurity?
Yeah. I think, but I think for two reasons. I think obviously the aspect of cybersecurity is kind of very much kind of this front door at your house. There is also other kind of components as part of cybersecurity, which include information security. So again, if you think again from an AI perspective with regards to using Twitter, again, having Twitter bot there, having Hootsuite send things at certain different times, that sort of thing as well. There's components of kind of machine learning and AI based within that. There's the reverse aspect here, which is about, okay, well, how does your customers feel about that? How do they feel in which you could be kind of involved with something which is around the big brother aspect? But that in itself kind of leads back to kind of the whole cybersecurity aspect. Again, very much, yes, we have to operate. Yes, there are, again, our kind of, our responsibilities to kind of to run the organization, but we also have a responsibility to our customers. Again, how they feel and how our clients feel, and again, kind of how are we kind of engaging with those? So there's, I suppose we're subjecting kind of our clients in that same way to kind of things like kind of AI and machine learning a lot. This becomes the kind of the new fashion, I feel like, in terms of kind of IT.
No, that's right. And Steve, you know, you were talking about the layers, which I think is a great image. Do you see a situation where through, you know, forgive me, AI and machine learning, new layers are almost creating themselves, learning from the attacks on your systems and that kind of thing? So you could almost buy a service, which is a strange kind of statement, but is alive, which is that whenever there's an attack that even is kind of newer, it learns from that and creates stronger defenses. Do you see that happening, Stephen?
Yes, it's happening today, thankfully. There are a lot of advanced tools out of there where they are doing excellent machine learning. And the good thing is you can chuck unknown attacks, and these devices, these bits of software are taking these attacks, and they know already these are using indicators. They're using these common things that we always see in these attacks, and they're actively blocking them. And that's without pushing an antivirus update or a software definition update to whatever it's protecting. They already know these are typical indicators, and it deals with it instantly. You just end up with the report in an email saying, yes, we've protected you 57 times today.
Excellent. Any final questions from our attendees, please put them in the chat box for us, and then I will probably get Stephen to kind of jump in. I wanted to actually ask you something closely aligned to earlier comments you made, David, around your own actually privacy. You know, maybe that's where it begins. So we know that a lot of people will be using Google for some reason, and therefore have a Google account. And I wanted to get your views on, if you can be bothered, and if you take the time with a glass of wine and your comfy slippers on, you can actually go into your Google account and control an enormous amount of the parameters and what information is tracked. Indeed, you can actually ask to be forgotten if you see fit. Is that worth someone's time to go into the Google settings and control what is being tracked about what they do or not on the internet?
So this is where kind of between Stephen and I, you get kind of two differing
oh,
approaches.
right. Well, we'll get your view, David, and then we get Stephen.
So obviously for me, in terms of, so in the nicest way possible, I'm very ambivalent to that kind of activity. I realize kind of, again, the business model that Google has, that they are effectively a data processing organization. The whole reason for existence is about kind of data and advertising. And I get that. It would be very remiss, again, from a kind of a business point of view, to say, okay, let's kind of, I suppose I need to say this right, but kind of interfere kind of with their business model per se. Of course, what Google has succumbed to is GDPR. So GDPR certainly from an EU point of view, but also GDPR from a California state point of view as well. So this is why they've put their kind of regulations in place. I think, so personally, I understand kind of what that data is used for. I understand kind of what it's there for. I obviously as well understand kind of what the risks are. So that may be kind of my get out of jail card in terms of kind of my attitudes towards this, is that I understand kind of what that data is, what it's there for, and again, what I'm doing. I'm not doing anything bad, I promise. So by the same token, I've got nothing to hide. But also likewise, in terms of my kind of online activity, could that be exploited for anything else? Potentially. And this is where Stephen and I kind of differ on our views, because I look at the good side of the human and say this is kind of, again, how this data should be kind of used. Stephen's took me because it's true. Stephen also very much kind of looks at the bad side of the human.
So let's catch you, Stephen, there. Tell us about the bad side of humanity and what we should be careful about then.
That's a rather positive note to start out on. But yeah, I mean, the problem is they're always collecting data. They're always looking at what they can advertise towards you because they're offering a free service. So if you've got a Gmail account, you know, there is a fine print there that says that they're going to look at certain things about the metadata of what you're sending and receiving. Likewise, you're kind of accepting that I'm not paying anything for this, so I'm going to continue to use it. There has to be a trade-off, unfortunately. Where I feel it oversteps is when it's used at the level and the capability that the likes of Google, Microsoft and such have. They are thankfully getting better with GDPR, and it's nice to see that they are finally kind of reining in the data use and how they actually do it. But just to give you an example, there are stories out there on Twitter where people have been searching for terms, and then you find that they're getting personalized adverts. It's all the big data behind it. So you've searched for this product, therefore you must be pregnant, or you've searched for this product, therefore you're looking for a new car, or will be looking for a new car because it's on its last legs. These sort of trends are how they're using this data. And I mean, it doesn't worry some people. It also, it is a scary thing to think of, that there is all this data about us in the ether, in the cloud. Someone else's server has all this data about me. It has this data about you. Do you really care about it? Some people do, because, prime example, there was a case on Twitter recently where someone was pregnant. They unfortunately miscarried. And for months afterwards, the trends were saying, you are pregnant, therefore we're going to chuck pregnancy-related advertising towards you. We're going to send products in your email. And it's a very upsetting time for that individual to have that big data targeted in that way. It literally took some engineers from the company in question to deal with that on Twitter, and they went and sorted it out for their teams.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of a presentation I gave many years ago. Actually, it was back in Leeds, and I don't know, I felt contentious that day, and the title was "Automation Makes You Look Dumb," and it was all about, at the time, the big rise in automating everything around marketing, and forgetting the human, element of, can we stop for a moment and wonder whether or not this is wise? And I had countless examples, not as dramatic as this one, about automation making a company look dumb. I remember once it was actually my friends from PayPal who sent me an email saying, "You have money in your account, go and spend it." I was like, wow, have they gifted me some money, because I knew they didn't have any money at all. So I got a bit excited, right? So I went in, and sure enough, I had 1 penny. And I was thinking, which was essentially what was left of a purchase from weeks ago, and I realized, thinking, well, surely it must be within that kind of mental capacity to put a rule in place to say, if whatever is left in someone's PayPal account is less than a tenner, let's not send that email out saying you've got some money, go spend it. And that's what I mean by automation makes you look dumb. And I think that's we're only going to learn by making mistakes. I'm going to ask you one question. I'm going to turn to Stephen. Do you believe, or is it true, that if I'm talking to my friends and my phone is on, somebody listens to me, and then I get some adverts that relate to the conversation I've had? So I'm asking Stephen
Yes.
and David.
Yes.
I'm not asking, Vital Service Northeast Limited. I'm asking personally, does it listen to me, and is it why I'm going to get some adverts now for the next 2 weeks about cybersecurity and what software to use? What say you, Stephen?
No, don't ask him first.
The devices are always listening. So if you've got an Alexa, you've got Siri or anything like that, they are always listening for those keywords. They do supposedly discard the data. Whether or not you believe them discarding the data, it's one until it's proven for me. But this is my paranoid side.
Okay, David, what do you say?
Yes, I totally agree. I think my academic interest is about privacy online. So that's kind of what it is. At some point, you'll have agreed to do that, though. That's a problem. So I think this is where, again, tech companies themselves, they put kind of strenuous terms and conditions in place. So what you're doing is just saying accept. And within that acceptance would have been, yes, I agree.
On the plus side, because my wife and I use a similar, system. We work on the business. So if I keep talking about what I want for Christmas,
yes,
then get the adverts, and then of my birthday in October, we should get the adverts, and then I get what I want.
If you see it in earshot of her or a phone, or just shout at her phone,
or keep using her phone for 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Please, and then she gets the adverts, and that becomes obviously something that she's going to get me. All right, Stephen Fennick, do we have some questions from our lovely audience? Been really great today.
We do have one or two, yes. I think a few people have maybe had a few problems getting the questions into the chat for whatever reason. I'm not totally sure. I've not done anything to disable it, so perhaps Zoom's just having a bit of a strange kind of half an hour or something. But we have got a few in the Q&A section, so feel free, guys, if you're not getting any joy through chat, then just pop it straight into the Q&A bit, and we can just ask from there as well. That's no problem. So we got a question in here from an anonymous attendee, which is just asking, what are your views about storing passwords on a Google account?
Do you want to take this, David, or should I?
Stephen,
I'll take it first.
Stephen, it's an anonymous question, so you're the guy that loves anonymity. So.
The passwords tend to be synced up to a Google account. So when you sign in and chuck your Google address in, the passwords are stored. They are up in the cloud. They are stored on the cloud. And obviously, if anyone ever gets access to your account, they can access them. Likewise, if anyone gets access to your computer, they can just go straight into the Google settings. They can pull up those passwords. Yes, they might have to enter a Windows password, but if they've had access to the device for a few days and they know that password, it's not a roadblock to them getting elsewhere. Dedicated password managers are the better sort of side of that thing. So much like LastPass, 1Password, Dashlane. There are dozens of tools out there. Again, don't take a recommendation from me about the specific one. Go and read and have a look and see what you think about how they store the passwords. They often have this on their tool. This is how we store your data. This is how we encrypt it. This is how we protect it. What I will say is I do very much like the model where they never know the password. All they get is an encrypted string, and there are quite a few password managers like 1Password and Dashlane that do that. So the service themselves can never know your password or details. They just know it's an encrypted string, and you have a device-specific password on your device that ensures they never get that. It's always an anonymous string, an encrypted string to them.
Super. Would you mind, whilst David takes the next question, to write down the short list of platform that we should investigate for ourselves and study? If you don't mind, put that in the chat area, Stephen, all the names you've mentioned a moment ago. Stephen, number 2, can we have a question for David, please?
No problem. Yes, got a question from Aaron as well. So he uses iCloud Keychain and Google Password saves often. The passwords are saved in He also uses passwords created by them, which are usually kind of a number of hash marks, and they're complicated. Most of the data is under a 2-point verification process, either by mail, text, or app like Google Authenticator. Is this safe? Should we be doing more to secure passwords?
That is a nigh on perfect example of kind of how to do the passwords. Everything. I think obviously because there are kind of I suppose several kind of ecosystems there, if you like. So obviously iCloud being very much aligned to Apple, and again, as Steve said before, that's very much kind of in the cloud. But again, Apple's took its 2-factor authentication stages even further, so that's a better. In terms of, I said the only kind of niggle slightly would be around kind of with regards to the previous question, which is about using Chrome purely to save the passwords. I think the next layer would be don't allow Chrome to save your passwords, because again, that could mean, and I appreciate again, Google's got 2-factor authentication anyway. But again, that could mean that we could log onto a PC as you, spoof you, log in, get your passwords, and then we've got access to all your details. The next layer of kind of taking that kind of further would be a kind of a password manager. And the ones that Stephen have mentioned in the chat, those would be excellent examples of doing that. So say from the question that's been asked, kind of perfect response. If you want to take it that little bit further, then have a look at something like kind of 1Password, Dashlane, those type of products.
Thank you very much, David. Next question, please, Stephen.
Yeah, I think there was one that I missed from previously, from Simon. He was just asking, is Defender okay to use with Apple?
Is that
Stephen, please?
It could be several products, because a lot of companies are using Defender as the branding. Microsoft has their platform for Defender. So do we have any more specifics to that one?
We don't. No. I mean, if you'd like, Sam, if you'd like to put any more detail in around that in the chat or on the Q&A, then feel free, and hopefully we can get that answered for you. I think that's it, guys, for now.
Okay, super. So could I ask Stephen to maybe give us final thoughts and recommendations to help our communities in kind of Durham and Leeds City region to just move up a few notches in their understanding and practices of, protecting and preventing cyber threats? What would be your top recommendations?
Get a password manager is definitely one of them. More so for if you've got an organisation and want to spread that out, and allow your staff to have it. We have it personally at Vital. We have both a personal and a work account paid for by Vital. And the reason we did so is we were elevating ourselves. What's the sense in selling all of these things to our clients and not eating our own dog food? Why are we reusing passwords? And that's a change we've done over years. So we don't have shared passwords. We don't have typed passwords that we've randomly invented on that moment. What we have is a master password and 2-factor that allows us to get to the vault of passwords. And those vaults we know are mostly secure. Again, have a look at the vendor and their specifics and how they do it. In terms of early hanging fruits, like you say, it's always about the patching. It's always about having a good antivirus program. Elevating yourself with some sort of vulnerability assessment or vulnerability scan is the next level. At least then you know exactly what's happening on your network, on your devices, because you can see what an attacker would see. You can see the exact same sort of results and what the recommendations are to improve those. Unfortunately, not all of these assessments are free, which is a bit of a downside, but they do often come with recommendations on how to resolve your issues and how to make yourself better. Same with Active Directory accounts. If you've got servers on site, who has administrator passwords? Should they have administrator passwords? Do they have the right rights to the server and the data and all of the services that run? It's all too common that I go into an organization blindly and you see there's an admin, as in an admin receptionist, who has administrator rights because someone has misread or misinterpreted what their role is in the organization. Same as you often find they give them administrator rights in terms of when they update Sage rather than updating the software themselves. Unfortunately, those administrator rights allow you to get all the way through the network. So if that person opens a malicious attachment, there's no stopping what they can touch, what they can break. And you often find this with crypto malware, which is things like you'll have heard WannaCry and crypto locker, they open, they have the rights of the person. If they've got administrator rights, they can go and touch everything on that device. They can go to the servers and then touch everything on there. And there are some rather nasty variants that will actually sit on the network for weeks and months. They will literally jump from machine to machine, and you literally have the hardest time in the world removing them because they're so well ingrained. To coin a phrase from one of my friends I was speaking to last night at Microsoft, he was going to have to nuke and pave an entire customer's network because it had been sat on the network, it had got to admin level privileges, it had got to the backups on the servers, and it had compromised those backups. They had no data that they could restore back to on site.
Well, thanks very much. I'm going to ask you, David, actually to maybe focus on what we talked about. So let's get ourselves re-registered with the ICO and show interest in their recommendation and practices. We're going to find ways to keep ourselves informed where possible. What are your top recommendations based on our conversation today?
I think the key thing is that we believe that we're not too far away from people ringing 999 to report cybercrime. So in terms of kind of what's on the horizon. But I think if we get back to our analogy about the Wild West, the Wild West wasn't kind of run just by kind of outlaws. There were elements of obviously police and sheriffs that were that could be used to be called upon to protect businesses against kind of malicious kind of activity. And I think if we again kind of use that analogy and apply that, I think that's kind of, again, that's very much kind of encompasses kind of what our potential kind of risks are, but also likewise, again, kind of what our opportunities are. It's a community activity. It's no man is an island, kind of no one's left kind of by their own devices to kind of do this. There are, again, kind of obviously free resources. Likewise, there are premium resources, but it's also likewise, it's very much kind of everyone's best interest to, again, to help their own organizations protect and obviously thrive.
It's interesting you should use the image of the 999 because only 2 days ago, my colleague Paul Clark was contacted by Northumbria Police and the Northeast Regional Cybercrime Unit with some great information. I realized as I'm saying this, it sounds like it was in trouble, far from it. Paul has actually been liaising with the Northeast Regional Cybercrime Unit regularly to say, you must have some information that would be of use to our local businesses. And what is interesting is for businesses out there, for the duration of the pandemic and COVID-19, they are offering a free vulnerability assessment. And what they are asking you to do through a series of registration, which is very, very light touch because I did it only yesterday, they're asking you to share your current and existing public IP address. And they're going to do a free assessment of anything that could actually potentially happen using obviously techniques that would be known to you. So what I'm going to do is for everybody, I'm going to copy and paste the email address that you can use to show interest in terms of being part of this free assessment during the period of us working remotely. And I think it's playing to how we began this conversation about the increase in remote location working, the increase in cyber attacks, and the need to upscale ourselves. And I think to have people like Northumbria Police and Northeast Regional Cybercrime Unit interested is kind of nice. What I will say is, whilst we do have some friends joining us today from the Leeds City region, do get in touch with them. If they can't help you, I would like to think that there would be the equivalent support and scheme in the Yorkshire region. I can see David nodding away. I'd imagine that most regions have organised themselves with their own cybercrime unit. Is that the case?
We certainly had a experience with the Northern was excellent in terms of, again, from a partnership working from our perspective. We've actually got a client in North Yorkshire who's involved with North Yorkshire Police Service. So obviously, if that's two different regions, as you see, there must be other equivalents. But they're very, very good.
So listen, can I begin by thanking both of you, Stephen and David, for your time today. I have to say those webinars are becoming something that we all look forward to spend some time in each other's company as we are kind of stuck at home. I hope you've enjoyed it and the whole experience of chatting to me, to my colleague Stephen, Paul, and the others, and our attendees. If and when our lovely audience live and on replay have further questions, what is the best way to get in touch with you and can continue the conversation? I'll start with you, David.
The best thing I think in terms of reach, obviously, again, is by kind of corporate links. If we can put our email address, telephone number, kind of website and things up in terms of the chapter, that helps as well. We had a wonderful slide prepared just in case whenever came at that point. We have one there. So yeah, so they're very much kind of the normal routes there. And appreciate it again. I'm just going to speak on behalf of Stephen. Stephen's very kind of very active in the community, so you can find him on loads of weird and wonderful things. So I'll let him speak.
Stephen, how can we find you? Even though you tell us you like to be anonymous on the internet, there must be a way to find you, surely.
It is one of those. I do have a Twitter account. There is also LinkedIn as well. But on Twitter, my tag is @Stephen_Vital. But like I say, feel free to catch me on LinkedIn, email as well, Stephen@vitalservice.co.uk, and obviously I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Super. And I know that obviously this is something that you guys look into, keep yourself informed and so on. Out of interest, do you have any blog series going on, any other resource that we could maybe tap into?
Do you want to answer that one, Stephen?
Not at present, in development at the moment.
It's been an ongoing debate. I think kind of one of the kind of things about is kind of how do we kind of what's the correct kind of angle to kind of come with this? So again, we didn't want to kind of appear kind of preachy. We've been very open about that. We didn't want to come and say, okay, this is what it is. It's about kind of that best practice kind of aspect. And again, I think one of the things we've always struggled with is kind of how do we go at it? But it's been a long-standing discussion.
That's all right. I know I know some people know about online marketing and blogging, so I can pass on some names if you want. So, listen, on behalf of the host organization, Digital Drive County Durham and Digital Knowledge Exchange, and on behalf of our wonderful audience today here live and on replay, a huge thank you again for your time and for sharing your knowledge in a very honest and frank way. I think it's very, very refreshing. A subject that is going to stay with us for as long as we're trading and using the web, for good. Whilst, of course, we have to face others who are maybe through accidents or through criminality do something very, very different. So I'm going to, say goodbye to everybody and wish you all very, very, good times in current climate. And we hope to be able to see each other properly, very, very soon. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.